Hello and welcome to MTG Deck Tech with Chris. We'll be deck teching the deck that I'm gonna be playing at the SCG 5K Modern Open. I had some successful results with this deck, which kind of make me comfortable with it. Uh, my main issue is kind of like going to time in real life, which is it happened before, but it doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, I wouldn't say is because I'm playing slowly. Sometimes my opponent has a lot to do with it. Luckily for us in MTGO, this is not an issue since we have our own clock. So that being said, I don't think I'm gonna change the list at all because I just feel very comfortable with it. And we'll be discussing some of our picks today. It's actually like it's a deck that has quite the amount of decisions in it, although it seems very straightforward. So let's begin. It starts with the mana base because what's going on in the deck is basically a blue-white control list splashing for Omnath and Wrenn, which is kind of where this deck was going. I feel like when we inserted Leyline Binding, we already had a splash onto two colors without wanting the color. It was kind of just to fulfill the main aspect of it, but I noticed that we always and very often we're having four color mana on turn four for Omnath. So Omnath is a creature that gains you a lot of life and replaces itself when it comes into play, which is very important because it always puts you ahead, and the life gain is very important in a deck which manages life as a resource. So you're going to be taking a lot of damage, and very often just gaining four just buys you enough time to continue countering things and gaining card advantage with Memory Deluge and so on. And the mana is not that important, but it's a very nice to have. I will always prioritize gaining life over the mana just because it's except in specific scenarios, but mainly because the life gain is what the Omnath is here for. The extra mana, there's not really a card to be played to punish your opponent. So there's no real space for it unless you're casting like a Solitude or something of that sort that's really going to do a number on your opponent. Another thing about the deck is that I know I said at the beginning that I gone to time, but again, it doesn't happen very often. But with Omnath, the clock actually speeds up a lot because you have Kaheera as your companion, which helps you close a lot of these games very quickly, especially with Solitude. You're attacking, like if you have a Solitude and a Kaheera, you're attacking for 7. If you have an Omnath, you're attacking for 8. So it's a really fast paced clock. So it's something to definitely highlight on this deck. Okay, so let's get to the mana base, right? Because this is what we wanted to discuss. So mainly we have two triomes, right? We have the Sultai Triome and then the Jeskai Triome. So in my opinion, these are the triomes you kind of want to be playing because it's what helps you cast also Wrenn and Six in turn 2, and it's very important if you want to kind of get ahead on the Merc type matchup, for example, the Yawgmoth matchup. You want to be able to cast these Wrens on turn 2. One of the good cool things about Wrenn is that it gets to ping the creature, right? So you get to like 2-for-1 your opponent because they need to attack the Wrenn, which ends up buying you more time because they're not attacking you, and you're furthering this resource of your life, furthering the resource card advantages of card advantage. Um, but I was going to say the main reason Wrenn is here is because it lets you put a land in your hand. So what happens very often with this deck is that it's very mana hungry. As you can see, the combat mana cost of this deck is towards the higher side. It's not a deck that is going to be casting a lot of 5 offs or 6 offs because the Leyline Binding costs 1 or 2. Solitude, most of the time, it's free unless if you're casting it for 5, you're most likely going to win that game. Um, but what happens a lot is that you want to keep counterspell up. So counterspell is 2 mana, you counter a spell, but you want to be able to cast your things while having counterspell mana up because you never want to tap out. This deck plays really easily at instant speed, and then for that you always need to have at least 4 mana, 5 mana. So Wrenn really helps you get there with the land drops. It also helps you with a threat because ultimating Wrenn with a counter spell just makes their hand unplayable. Every land you draw is a counter spell, right? And it's actually one of the ways that this deck tends to win. I wouldn't say very often, but probably half the time you're winning with Wrenn, or uh, maybe like 40%, 40 to 50% of the time you're winning with Wrenn. It's not something outrageous. It's just because the game goes so long, you're countering, 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 and you're getting ahead, in multiple ways. So you can win through damage, you can win through Wrenn. Wrenn is like the slower win game condition, um, but you still are able to get there. Um, so the triumphs also get very good because you're able to cycle them and then bring it back with Wrenn. So its +1 becomes pay 3 mana, draw a card, which towards the end of the game or the beginning of the end of the game, it starts being very very productive. Another thing I wanted to highlight was this Wrenn and Omnath interaction. So you're able to always bring a fetch, so you're always able to gain life, and you're always able to get the second edition of Omnath's ability. One cool thing that I noticed as well was that Omnath's third land drop ability, which deals 4 damage to Planeswalkers, is very huge. Because very often too, you have issues dealing with Planeswalkers. Since Leyline Binding and Prismatic Ending have been printed, this doesn't happen so often. But for example, against decks that are playing Gris or so on, it can get a little awkward. And if your Omnath is able to stick at least for a turn, you're able to, and you play around certain things, you're able to kind of have these two fetches in play and then just go off. It is a stretch, but I done it in the past and it's something that really worked out for me. So it's something to always keep in mind. I really enjoy these small interactions that the deck has because it brings the power of the deck out. And you'll notice it because if you're playing and you miss it, these are the ways you get ahead. These are these small things, these small details are what make the deck really, really powerful. Another thing to highlight with Wrenn are the different land abilities. So in this case, like Otawara helps you bounce Blood Moon, helps you bounce a creature, helps you bounce multiple things, right? Artifacts, so on, enchantments. So what happens with Otawara is that you get to discard it, and then if you have a Wrenn in play, you get to bring it back to your hand, and then you get to do it again. So it's very very useful, especially when you're trying to buy yourself some time until you either find a win condition or another way to dig you into more cards, right? So like either finding a Memory Deluge or finding an Omnath or finding a Solitude or so on. Um, Okay, that being said, we do this deck. It's soft to Blood Moon, but it's not that soft to Blood Moon because we are playing 3 islands, 1 plains, and you can basically with the plains in play, you can cast you can cast a ley line because you only need one plus the mountain, so it's already shortening the amount of the cost of the ley line by 2. And if you happen to have an island, now it's 3, so now your ley line only costs 3. And you start getting into the space where you're able to cast a lot of your spells. It only gets awkward sometimes when you have like Solitudes and you only have a plains. I mean, Blood Moon, it's a good card against you, but is by no means a lock. So I would try to play through a Blood Moon as well. I had success playing around with the Blood Moon because you're able to bring back fetches. So you should always keep that in mind. Just actively play around the Blood Moon as well. Okay, I think that's it with the mana base. I wanted to say, let's finish the land abilities and then I'll finish this last excerpt that I wanted to highlight. So we have whole Storm Giants, which is one win condition. Again, you're always winning with the Hole, the Wrenn, or the Omnath. Hole is kind of strange. I haven't won actually games with Hole that much, so perhaps this should be a change. But let me know in the comments what you think. It's a blue white staple, so it does win you the game. It is very good, so I don't want to take it out. but it is something to consider. What I wanted to do was I wanted to insert a third Triumph because sometimes the mana can be awkward, and also that third Triumph will help you cycle with Wrenn and draw a card more often. It will also kind of give you a there are certain occasions where you have to take 3 damage just to cast a Ren or just to cast the Omnath that turn, and it kind of stops that issue because the more lands of more colors you have, then the easier it is to cast different cards. And you'll notice with this deck too, it's like very easy to have 4 to 3 colors, so it happens very often. Definitely give it a try. Play it a couple times before you take it to the tournament. Maybe like a league, maybe definitely like maybe a couple leagues, maybe a couple maybe some 2 mans, but definitely get to test it out against a metagame because a lot of the power behind the deck is knowing the metagame and knowing the key cards of every deck that you're playing against. So, and what I'm expecting to play are actually the decks I'm actually trying to play against are um, Rhinos or any Cascade decks. I feel are a really good matchup for this deck. Uh, also, and I know a lot of people said that creativity was an issue for this deck, but in my experience, I played it twice, I beat it twice. I can see how it can get awkward, but every time I played it, I always felt happy. It's a combo deck that it's concentrated on just casting one card, so if you can always play around that, you feel very comfortable. Also, you have a lot of removal, so you always tend to hit, their creatures. Like it almost it's not an issue. So in my experience, it has been a fair matchup. Another matchup that I really like with this deck is Hammer. Surprisingly, so because you have Solitudes, you have Leylines, you have Prismatic Endings, you have Archmage's Charm. Archmage's Charm is really good, especially when you take their creature, and now you have a 10/10, and their clock is 2 turns, and you tend to have more answers than them. So when you take their creature, they're really behind, but they're also not able to interact with their own combo. So it's also because they're boarding against control, so they're not gonna have a lot of removal, which is a funny thing, but it's very often what tends to happen. Also, Ren is very good against the Sentinel. So even if you let them draw a card, and if they don't have Cigar to Sate, I'm okay with them drawing a card because I'm still pinging their guy, and then I still have a Planeswalker that's going to get the lands back to my hand. Chalice on 1 is really good against them, so that's something to keep in mind. So I think um, those are kind of the decks that I want to be playing with this deck. Yawgmoth, on my experience, when I used to play one Hallowed Moonlight main deck, and when it came up, it was very good against Cord and all the other persist creatures. So it was very often good. So I bring them in after on game 2. So that matchup also, I like it. I think it's favorable. It's by no means amazing, but I think it's on your favor. It has to be on your favor because Dress Down kills their combo right away. Not that it stops it for that turn, and but the thing with Dress Down is it also stops the persist ability. So whenever you're able to block, you're able to have these tricks where uh you're buying yourself time, and that's at the end. That's kind of what you want to do. The deck is very powerful towards the end when you're casting multiple Prismatic Ending, Leyline Bindings. They have a hard time just pushing through that wall of removal. And if you have like a counterspell, Archmage's Charm, now you're well set to deal with most of the things. Um, so those are kind of the matchups I want to play. I feel like the deck is very well set. In this metagame, I feel there are problem decks. I played against Tron. I have 2 Spreading Seas. I wasn't. I believe I beat it once and I lost it once. So I know it can be a great matchup, but I feel like you can play your way around it sometimes. Just because like Karn becomes a remove, 7 mana remove your land, but you just get to leyline it. So if you're able to kind of counter key things, like if they don't cast the Ulamog, then you're okay. You're not that far off. Anything else, obviously, you're gonna be in trouble if they do get to Ulamog you. And then Chalice on 1 against Tron is actually really, really useful. It's very good. Okay, so let's go into detail about some of the picks here. So let's start with two dress down. So dress down has been amazing. What the issue with blue white initially was that you often play against these hammer decks, or you play against the decks playing Ursa Saga, and they were able to stick threats without you being able to counter it. You had no interaction with it. The come into play abilities from other decks as well. um, when they resolved, you just couldn't do anything about it, and it just turned into this very awkward stage. Dress down is able to shut down their card advantage and give you a card, so it's almost a two for one. Because although you're not counting the creature per se, the creature itself, you are counting the ability and drawing a card. So it's buying you, is kind of giving you that some of that tempo back. So dress down tends to be really really good. It's amazing against it's re- I mean, I surprisingly think it's really good against Ragavan because they tend to dash it a lot, and just dressing down the Ragavan for a turn and then setting up again is kind of like, now they have to rethink, right? Do I want to cast my Ragavan into an open counterspell? Do I want to attack when he has Solitude mana open? So it really makes it awkward for them, and just drawing a card to kind of get one land to get further just to find the land is very good. So worst case scenario, it always cycles itself. Best case scenario, you're like killing a ballista, stopping just creature abilities from triggering. Or, and this is kind of what happened to me against burn deck, right? I was able to dress down Solitude, so the evoke trigger doesn't happen, and then I get to keep it next turn. I'm attacking for three, gaining three. So you have these kind of cool interactions going on that really push the deck ahead. And dress down was a really huge card being printed that helped blue white deal with Saga, deal with these problem creatures that gave your opponent card advantage, right? But now you're the one uh, having the card advantage by drawing a card with dress down. Okay, let's go with counterspell. Counterspell, I think, is a really obvious pick. It's a staple of blue white. You just want to be controlling the board. And one thing that I would say with counterspell is you just, and it's very obvious, but again, I want to point out the obvious. It's that you want to really think about what you should counter, because what constantly happens with blue white is you're mitigating how much can you let your opponent get ahead before you're able to stabilize. So very often, sometimes, very often actually, you're gonna let things resolve and just hold a counter spell for that one ability, for that one spell that it's an issue for you. And every deck has its issue cards, and if you let them get resolved, you will not be able to win the game because it just snowballs so quick. So, for example, in Yawgmoth, Gris is a problem card. You need to counter Gris, right? You need to also counter the Yawgmoth or anything that searches for the Yawgmoth. So, these are things to keep in mind. I like to tend. I enjoy playing my removal first. I like to play my removal first, kind of get rid of, if sorcery speed removal, which prismatic ending I have, I would like to get rid of that first. Then my ley lines, and then if I absolutely have to, and I feel like it's not within my tempo range, I will counter something. So counterspell is a very, it's a spell that requires a lot of thinking and a lot of maneuvering. So I would say definitely think a lot before you decide to counter a spell, because very often it's better to keep counter spell in your hand and let something resolve and deal with it. Maybe top deck something, hope to draw into something, than to counter it. Because sometimes there are just cards that come into play. Just I mean, they're like an opponent resolves a Teferi, you're gonna have a hard time if you don't have a counter spell, right? That being said, if they play a Teferi, I'm countering the Teferi. Um, okay, we spoke about Wrenn, so I think I think there's enough talk about Wrenn. The Archmage's Charm. So Archmage's Charm, again, I said, is really good against Hammer. It's also a counter spell, but one of the main things that I really like about this deck, and I said it before, was that deck plays at instant speed, right? What happens very often is that you are trading one for one with your opponent. Your Prismatic Ending, your Leyline Binding. Sometimes you're even putting yourself behind just to gain a little bit of tempo with Solitude, right? So what happens is that you start falling behind in card advantage. or you start just one for one and just trading. So Archmage's Charm either helps you catch up or helps you get you ahead, right, of that disparity in card advantage. So I'm very often drawing two with Archmage's Charm. I know you want to save the counterspell, but for example, the main difference between Archmage's Charm and counterspell is that Archmage's Charm costs three. So a 3 mana counterspell is much more clunkier than a two, obviously, than a 2 mana counterspell. But since Archmage's Charm is clunkier, I rather draw two, get me to either a counterspell, get me either to a Memory Deluge, or get me to an answer or a threat quicker. Because the place that I want to get to is having my threat while also dealing with their threats. So Archmage's Charm helps you get there, and it also is very good when you're drawing cards, but it's also very good. If you counterspell, then that's fine because you need to protect yourself from what's going on. But if you can draw two, I very often like to draw two. Sometimes I let my opponent spells go through just so I can draw two. And if it's a creature, for example, we have a lot of outs to creatures. Uh, Sometimes Omnath gaining 4 is enough to kind of shut a creature off, right? That's just like a 3. It's just beating you for 3 or just beating you for 2, and it's not really doing much else, right? I mean, this is the things that you need to manage. You need to manage your life as a resource, but then you also need to manage, mm, you know, hey, if I'm drawing cards, right? What can my cards do for me? And since I said like the deck is very mana hungry, drawing lands of very often are going to put you ahead because your lands also have abilities and they interact very well with your cards. So that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight about Memory Deluge. Think about drawing. Teferi, this is kind of controversial thought I have, but very very often I feel casting Teferi is very awkward. I mean, it's a great card, amazing card. It's one of the main reasons people play blue white, and I enjoy playing with the card, right? Because it kind of shuts your opponent doing anything on your turn if you're trying to do something really crazy. Where, for example, Omnath plays Solitude or Omnath flashback Memo Deluge, then Teferi is the card for you. But the thing about Teferi is that very often, again, the deck starts playing from behind, so I'm bouncing something, drawing a card, and then it's dying. Now, it's a good way to kind of like have them hit the Teferi, not hit you, so you're somewhat gaining life, bouncing something, drawing a card, which is nice, but it's not where you want to be. So managing Teferi is very important in this deck. But also 3 mana. Again, 3 mana starts being anything after two starts being very clunky and very slow. So I really start trying to think like, how am I gonna work, my hand onto the future turns, or how or what am I casting this turn? I try to be mana efficient, but at the same time, I try to also put the mistake on my opponent, because what happens very often too is like, oh, your opponent immediately thinks you have counterspell, so now they're casting their worst card, right? Or they're trying to play around the counterspell. Um, Sometimes they're not even playing around the counterspell, but most often they'll try to play around the counterspell, and that's already adding you value. So Teferi is kind of good to kind of punish them for that. But again, 3 mana can be a little bit slow, and tapping yourself out can lead to really problematic things, especially in this format. Um, so that's the reason why I'm playing three. I think if the format were to evolve, where there are more rhinos, there are more living index, there are more bring to light decks. I do think that I would add one more to Fairy, but at the moment, with Murktide, Hammer, Teferi is a good card against Hammer, but it's also a slow card against Hammer because again, you're tapping yourself out, so you don't want to tap yourself out against those type of decks. You will lose right away. More often than not, you will lose, even if you're bouncing something. Especially if your opponent is a really good player. Um, so yeah, if the format evolves to a place where Teferi becomes like insanely good, I will play it. But I really feel comfortable playing three because having two in your hand can be very awkward. Um, and sometimes tapping out is not what you want to be doing again with this deck. All right. Let's go to the 4 drops. So we initially, this used to be a Teferi Hero of Dominaria, but I'm testing it. I'm testing the Memory Deluge today. Putting 3 instead of the Teferi. So I really like 2 Memory Deluge. I'm gonna check how the third one goes. I often feel that I am looking to either get a Memory Deluge or cast a Memory Deluge so I can get to something else. And Memory Deluge is great at just finding you the key cards that you're trying to get, for your outs. Because remember, the deck is playing from behind, and what's going on is that you're trying to find these key pieces to kind of resolve the game. Omnath, I initially started playing 1, and now I'm playing 2, and I added 1 more to the sideboard. Omnath has been amazing. What used to happen very often with this deck, it was that you kind of turn off your opponent's removal, right? And then Solitude came into play. They printed Solitude, so then everybody was playing Solitude, and it was fine because Solitude was dying. But then you were casting it, and then they were killing your Solitudes, and now they printed cards that not only kill creatures but also kill Planeswalkers. So now they're killing all your stuff, right? Like things don't really have this layer of protection anymore, right? Before, Planeswalkers used to stick, and it was hard to deal with them, but now there are spells that both kill creatures and Planeswalkers. So what happens is that they utilize a lot of their removal, and then by the time you're able to set things up, either a Chalice shuts most of their removal, or they wasted their removal on like a Solitude. I had opponents waste their removal on the Kaheera when I played it, just because what happens very often is that they expect you to have one threat and just kill them with that one threat. So they will respond the moment they're able to cash in their removal. So if you're able to hold on to the Omnath, or you're able to, for example, just play, even just draw a card, it can be very good and a way to get ahead. So Omnath again has been great. Some very often is an answer for me because I'm managing my life, so I'm taking a lot of damage, and gaining 4 again just gets me ahead, right? So Omnath, it has been a great addition. uh I don't know if I want to go to a third one, because I do like having it in my hand, but sometimes it can be really slow, right? And maybe the mana does not cooperate that game, so these are a couple of things that you have to start thinking about. I like 2. I don't know if 3 is correct. As one thing to point out, talking about the 4 mana combat mana cost spells, is that this deck doesn't have Supreme Verdict, and that's because I feel like we have so many answers to creatures that we don't really need Supreme Verdict. I won't lie, there are occasions where the opponent goes wide, and there are decks where you definitely need it, because you won't be able to catch up, right? But I think with the current metagame, I am okay just not playing Supreme Verdict in the main deck. I had thought about adding a second one to the sideboard, and I think when we get to the sideboard discussion, we'll definitely chat a little bit more about that. But currently, I am happy with no Supreme Verdicts. The issues that came up, they were, I feel, rare occasions. Although it's come up, I won't lie. Okay, Solitude. Solitude is just a great card. I mean, I don't. Initially, the deck, I remember blue white decks started running 2 or 3, but you definitely always want 4. It's just, it gains you life. It helps you catch up on tempo. So it's a very useful card, and it's a threat with it by itself. So it's a threat that responds to a threat. So you that believe me, you want to play 4 Solitudes. Leyline Binding is the reason why this deck exists, kind of, because again, I noticed the splashing was going on, and then I said we can add these other 2 cards that are not only good, not only have synergy within themselves, but they also have synergy with the deck overall. So Leyline Binding, I like 4 of. You have to be a little bit careful, however, when your opponent, because they will bring in, after sideboard, they will bring in enchantment removal, and you want to play around it. One cool thing that I noticed after sideboard was that they were removing my Leyline Bindings when I took care of their creature. So I Hallowed Moonlight their card, and then it will get exiled, which is something to take into consideration when playing. Um, Prismatic Ending is just great removal. It doesn't get one issue with Prismatic Ending that to keep in mind. It doesn't get rid of the high combat mana cost because it just goes up to 5. And another thing is that it has really cool interaction with Teferi's +1. So sometimes you can get, an instant speed Prismatic Ending, which is neat. Um, Other than that, I think everything's pretty much set. Chalices are here to kind of stop your opponent from just casting multiple one drops, like two one drops on turn two, or if you're on the play, or two one drops on turn three. So Chalice is just there to kind of mitigate and shut off, really tempo plays. I love Chalice overall. It's here like against like the obviously living in Rhinos matchup, but it's also really good against Murktide and other random decks you'll see, maybe Tron or things like that. Because if you put Chalice on one, you're shutting off a lot of you're shutting off all their stars, right? You're shutting off their maps. You're shutting off their ancient steerings. So it can really cripple them depending on what their hand looks like. So depending how fast you're able to get it out there, you might be well set. Also, Chalice is really good against burn. Um, I know it's like a lot of burn plays like no, it's not that great, but what happens very often is that you're able to take damage. Like you're able to take obviously they're just gonna every spell deals you 3 to 4 damage, so you're just taking damage, and sometimes you just need to shut off or counter like two of their 1 mana spells, or like have them draw some creatures, something like that, because you are playing Counterspell, you are playing Archmage's Charm. So if you get towards the end, you have cards that gain you life. You have Solitude, you have Omnath, so and you have ways of finding these cards would really really help you out. The one thing against burn is that you are playing 11 fetches, so you are going to take some damage. So if you don't have to take that damage, don't take it by any means. I won one game where I mitigated the amount of damage I was taking through my fetch lands. I like literally did not cash them in. I was just drawing off the top, and I did have like my counter spells. I was able to sneak like a Teferi, made every Rift Bolt like cost 3 mana. So and I was with Chalice out, I was kind of like able to get there. And if I would have sacked my lands, I was down to 3. If I would have sacked, I had 5 fetch, I have 4 fetches in play. If I would have sacked my lands, I would have been dead. So the deck requires you to think about a lot of things. But at the same time, if you play it very well, you're going to feel that the deck has a good matchup against a lot of decks. Um, okay, so that's the discussion for our main deck. Let's go to our sideboard. The sideboard, I have to say, is by no means a stock sideboard. It's a sideboard that I enjoy playing. I will change some cards, however, for the Richmond 5K, because there's some cards that just haven't been able to convince me overall. But I would say it's most like a decent amount of the sideboard I'm very comfortable with. So Kaheera, obviously, because it's just a great is your companion, is just a great creature to pitch, or a great white card to pitch for Solitude. It goes well with the Omnath and Solitude, and sometimes you just need a blocker or a threat, just a 3/2 that gets in. Another thing I wanted to bring up, let's go to the cyber again. Another thing I wanted to talk about the cyber was the Betos. They're really good, especially against living in rhinos, creativity. Some burn is really not that bad. They're okay, you know. They're definitely better than other cards in here. It's definitely better than Wrenn, I think, because Wrenn is like a little too slow against them. It doesn't really kill many things, right? Spreading Seas. Spreading Seas is one of the cards that I'm considering. I mean, it's really good against Ursus Saga because it's able to kill it, draw you a card. But is there also for the Tron matchup, and is there for the Valakut matchups, right? So, um, one thing also, it stops the caverns if your opponent are on caverns, and it kind of helps you against Blood Moon. So if your opponent is just playing like a deck with 4 Blood Moons in it, it's something to consider if you want to play it, because most of your deck is blue. So if you're able to cast some of your blue spells, you probably will be fine. Also, you can Otawara bounce it, bounce a Blood Moon, and now you're back to having colors, and then sticking a threat, passing, you should be good. Um, okay, so spreading seas, therefore Ursa Saga, but we explained the rest. It draws you a card, so it kind of also helps you, keep making your land drops. The third dress down is there because there's so many creature abilities, fury, things that interact with you very well. So, and has your opponent like drawing cards and getting card advantage. So I really like dress down in this format. It's really good. So very often I will bring it in. The mystical dispute is also something that I will bring in against the merc type matches. Very often, your opponent is also bringing mystical dispute against you, so it's good to have a response for their response. And not only that, it counters a lot of their merc types, expressive iterations, or like spell pierces, trouble cards, right? Another other card that I was really happy with and very impressed is Stony Silence. So I know there was a huge spike on Affinity online, and then it kind of died out because a lot of people started playing like fours, and it's just something that I really like. I really like Stony Silence. It shuts off Tron, it shuts off um, Affinity, but it also helps you shut off Hammer. So very often hammers are playing, Hammer with Paladin interaction, but also they're playing Springleaf Drum. So sometimes they depend on that mana, and just turning that off makes it really awkward for them. So Stony Silence is one of those cards that just completely stops any artifact shenanigans going on. And sometimes there are very random decks out there that want to do funny things with artifacts, combo decks with artifacts, and it turns those off right away, and it's a card that they just don't have an answer to. Okay, next card, Hallowed Moonlight, is really good against creativity, really good against Yawgmoth, and really good in random cases. Like sometimes your opponent's putting uh, tokens in play, and you're just able to remove it with Hallowed Moonlight. So it's another one of those spells that helps you hit your land draws, but then at the same time it does something useful. So uh, I consider it in a lot of places. I really like the Hallowed Moonlight. Sanctifiers. Now, this is one of the things that I'm considering for uh, for Richmond, because the reason why I have the Sanctifiers here is that they're really really good against Scamp, right? Like they block the 3/3, they block Fury, they block almost all their cards except for the 3/2 Shadow, and you probably need a second creature for the Grief. But other than that, I mean, you're exiling everything. It's an answer also to Dredge, right? And it's a good way to like exile your opponent's cards from their graveyard and not exile your Memory Deluge. That is the reason why I don't have Rest in Peace in here. Now I did consider having Rest in Peace, but I don't know. I don't think I want my Memory Deluge getting exiled. There's like so much value in flashing it back. Um, I don't think. I mean, perhaps that's just me being really greedy. But I am happy with Sanctifier just blocking all day and just getting me to that point that I need to be, because very often you just need time with the deck, right? You just need a couple of turns where you block, and then you're able to stick your threat like Omnath, or like cast a Solitude, or Teferi bounce with Counterspell. So I really like these Sanctifiers, but I'm considering perhaps, and this is funny, I'm considering perhaps like another spell, because when you board in your Sanctifiers, it shuts off your Kaheera. So that's an awkward nombo that I like to fix. So if you guys have any, if you have any comments on this, please help me out. I'm very happy to think about this Sideboard slot. For now, I think if I don't receive any input, or I don't change my mind, I think I will be playing them, because they're just really good against Scamp, and really good in other small places where it's important. Okay, so that's almost everything. And these two slots are kind of like flex slots that I've been playing around. Supreme Verdict, you want it because again, you don't have a way to kind of deal with when they overextend. Most of the time, they won't overextend because they do think you're playing Supreme Verdict. Really good players though, they will overextend because they'll just make you have it, and they know you're not playing many. So I had the issue come up with Supreme Verdict, but not often at all. Maybe one or two games out of I don't know how many matches. Um, and then the Omnath here is because so I thought about a second Supreme Verdict, right? But Omnath just helps you in that creature matchup because you're gaining life. So if their creatures really don't have like a crazy ability, then you're pretty much fine. And the only thing is that again, it's legendary, so it kind of gets awkward. It's 4 mana, so sometimes it's not great to see in your hand. But if you're just playing a creature that gaining life drawing a card it's amazing. So that's it for the deck. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if I should be changing anything. And I also believe that soon I'll be driving this through a league. So if we have a league video after this, we'll see how it goes. I'll put up the link on the description for the 5-0 league that we played. Uh, my ad is Sumdeus in Mtgo, and we also have our Twitter page. So like, share, and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're having a fun time. Um, thank you very much.